The massive steel doors of the underground concrete bunker were locked tight. It was June 26, 1944. The French port city of Cherbourg was burning. The American military had surrounded the city, cutting off every possible escape route. Deep inside an impenetrable subterranean fortress, a high-ranking German commander sat in absolute safety. His name was Lieutenant General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben. He was the supreme commander of Fortress Cherbourg. He wore a pristine, perfectly tailored uniform. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. Adolf Hitler had given him a direct and unyielding order. He was commanded to defend the city to the very last man. He was ordered to never surrender under any circumstances. Von Schlieben was an aristocratic Prussian officer. He fully expected the Americans to follow the traditional bloody rules of European warfare. He expected the United States Army to send thousands of young infantrymen charging against his concrete bunkers. He expected the Americans to bleed for every single inch of ground. He was prepared to sit safely underground and watch the Americans exhaust themselves against his machine guns. But the Americans were not going to play his game. The United States military did not send vulnerable infantrymen to storm the steel doors. Instead, the ground above the bunker began to shake. Rolling slowly and methodically into the valley came the massive steel treads of American M4 Sherman tanks and heavy M10 tank destroyers. They drove straight past the defensive trenches. They rolled directly up to the entrance of the underground fortress. The American tank commanders did not ask for negotiations. They simply lowered their heavy 75mm cannons, pointed them directly at the steel bunker doors from point-blank range, and delivered a terrifying message. What happened to General von Schlieben over the next few hours completely shattered his aristocratic ego. It became one of the most satisfying and deeply authentic moments of American battlefield justice during the entire Second World War. To understand the humiliation of this German general, you first have to understand the man and the mission he was given. Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben was a hardened veteran of the German military machine. He had commanded armored regiments on the brutal Eastern Front. He was a proud member of the traditional German officer class. He believed in strict hierarchy. He believed in the absolute superiority of German defensive strategy. In June 1944, only weeks after the successful D-Day landings in Normandy, American forces desperately needed a deepwater port. They needed a place to unload massive cargo ships filled with food, fuel, and ammunition to sustain the invasion of Europe. Cherbourg was the ultimate prize. Hitler knew this. He declared Cherbourg a fortress. He personally ordered von Schlieben to hold the city at all costs. The order was crystal clear. The port was to be destroyed, and the defending German soldiers were to continue fighting until they ran completely out of ammunition. Von Schlieben took the order seriously. He fortified the hills, he armed the coastal batteries, and when the American artillery began to fall around the city, he retreated into the Sans-Souci tunnel system. It was a massive underground quarry converted into a bomb-proof military headquarters. The walls were thick solid rock reinforced with concrete. Von Schlieben sat in the darkness with more than 800 soldiers. He was completely cut off from the outside world. Food and water were running low, but his pride remained untouched. He firmly believed the Americans were soft and impatient. He thought that if he simply stayed hidden inside his concrete fortress, the Americans would eventually grow tired of the siege. He severely underestimated the ruthless efficiency of the American commanders. The American forces tasked with cracking Fortress Cherbourg belonged to the United States 7th Corps. They were commanded by Major General J. Lawton Collins. His men called him Lightning Joe. General Collins was the complete opposite of the aristocratic German commander hiding in the bunker. Collins was a tough and deeply practical American leader. He did not care about tradition, appearances, or outdated concepts of honor. He cared about results. He did not care about military pageantry. He had no respect for the old glamorous rules of gentlemanly warfare. He only cared about two things: winning the battle and keeping as many American farm boys and factory workers alive as possible. When General Collins arrived outside the Saint-Sauveur tunnel system, he studied the massive concrete entrances carefully. He immediately understood that sending young infantrymen charging through those heavy steel doors would become a complete slaughter. German machine gunners were waiting in the darkness, ready to tear American soldiers apart the moment they approached. In the old European tradition of war, generals expected men to die storming fortified walls. But the American philosophy of warfare was completely different. The Americans believed machinery and ammunition could always be replaced. Human lives could not. General Collins refused to order a suicidal infantry assault. Instead, he calmly picked up his radio, contacted his armored divisions, and ordered the heavy steel forward. The soldiers of the 79th and 9th Infantry Divisions held their positions. They watched as American armor rolled slowly past them. M4 Sherman tanks and M10 tank destroyers crawled into the narrow valley. Their heavy engines thundered loudly, echoing through the rocky quarry walls. Inside the underground bunker, General von Schlieben and his men felt the vibrations immediately. The ground above them physically trembled. German soldiers gripped their rifles tightly, expecting the Americans to blast the doors open and rush inside with grenades, flamethrowers, and bayonets. But the Americans never rushed inside. The tanks simply rolled forward until they reached the very edge of the tunnel entrances. Then the massive steel vehicles stopped. The tank gunners slowly lowered their heavy cannons until the barrels pointed directly at the reinforced bunker doors from point-blank range. There was almost no distance between them. The American gun barrels practically touched the entrance to the German fortress. For one agonizing moment, complete silence filled the valley. Then the American tank commanders gave the order to fire. The explosion was absolutely deafening. The 75 mm 3-inch high explosive shells slammed directly into the tunnel entrances. They did not fire once, they fired again and again without stopping. Anyone who has stood inside an enclosed space during a loud explosion understands how sound behaves. Now imagine being trapped inside a sealed rock tunnel while 30-ton American tanks fire high explosive artillery shells directly into the entrance. The concussive force inside the bunker became horrifying. Shock waves bounced violently off the concrete walls, rupturing eardrums and disorienting the men trapped inside. Dust and pulverized rock rained continuously from the ceiling. The American tanks were not even trying to storm the bunker. They were using overwhelming psychological terror to destroy the Germans' will to fight. Inside the bunker, General von Schlieben's grand fantasies of heroic resistance completely collapsed. He realized he was not a brilliant commander holding back a mighty invasion force. He was simply a trapped rat hiding inside a concrete box. He had absolutely no way to fight back against the American armor. Rifles and machine guns were completely useless against thick American steel. The enormous industrial power of the United States military was now sitting directly outside his front door. If he refused to surrender, the Americans were not going to rush the tunnels. They were simply going to remain outside in their tanks and continue firing point-blank into the entrance until the entire underground fortress collapsed and buried the German command alive. At last, the aristocratic pride of the Prussian general shattered. The heavy steel doors slowly creaked open. Through the thick clouds of choking dust, a white flag emerged. General von Schlieben, together with more than 800 terrified and exhausted German soldiers, walked out of the tunnel with their hands raised high above their heads. The supposedly invincible fortress of Cherbourg had finally fallen. The fortress had fallen, and the Americans had barely risked a single infantryman to capture it. What happened next became one of the most strangely satisfying moments of the entire battle. When General von Schlieben finally emerged from the bunker, he was escorted to the American command post to meet Major General Collins. Von Schlieben wore his finest uniform. His Iron Cross was perfectly arranged across his chest. His boots had been carefully cleaned. Even after surrendering, he carried himself with the stiff arrogance of a Prussian aristocrat. He expected General Collins to rise, salute him, and congratulate him on a noble and honorable defense. He expected to be treated like a respected military equal. Instead, General Collins simply stared at the German commander with cold, exhausted eyes. Von Schlieben, irritated that he was not receiving royal treatment, immediately began complaining. Speaking through an interpreter, the German general openly expressed outrage over the way the Americans had fought the battle. He claimed the American tactics were dishonorable. Von Schlieben argued that using heavy tanks and artillery to fire point-blank into bunker entrances was unfair. According to him, the Americans should have fought properly, man against man, using infantry assaults. He accused the United States of fighting a rich man's war by relying on superior machinery instead of the bravery of individual soldiers. It was an astonishing display of delusion. A man representing a regime that had bombed civilian cities and executed prisoners of war was now standing inside an American command tent complaining that the enemy had not fought fairly. General Collins did not lose his temper, he did not even argue. He simply looked at von Schlieben with complete indifference. Collins understood exactly why the German officer was so humiliated. He had not been defeated in some glorious last stand. He had been crushed by American machines, logistics, and ruthless practicality. General Collins calmly instructed von Schlieben to issue a radio order commanding the remaining German forces on the peninsula to surrender and save unnecessary lives. Von Schlieben arrogantly refused. He claimed his honor as a German officer would never allow him to give such an order. At that moment, Collins had heard enough. He realized the German commander was completely disconnected from reality. Collins wasted no more time. He ordered military police to take von Schlieben away and process him as an ordinary prisoner of war. But the final blow to the German general's ego was still coming. As a captured high-ranking officer, von Schlieben fully expected proper treatment. He imagined a warm meal, a chair, and perhaps even a glass of wine to soften the humiliation of defeat. Instead, American soldiers handed the aristocratic Prussian officer a cold green metal tin. It was a standard American sea ration. The exact same mass-produced canned food eaten by ordinary American privates sitting in muddy foxholes outside the city. There was no banquet, no ceremony, no special respect for his rank or social status. Allied photographers captured the moment perfectly. The photographs showed General von Schlieben sitting in captivity wearing his immaculate uniform while looking exhausted, miserable, and deeply humiliated. His grand defense of Fortress Cherbourg had not ended in glory. It ended in the back of an American jeep holding a cold can of rations. The capture of General Karl von Schlieben at Cherbourg became a perfect example of the enormous cultural clash that defined the Second World War. The German military elite were obsessed with the theater of war. They believed in glorious sacrifice, rigid social hierarchy, and fighting to the last man for national pride. To them, dying inside a concrete bunker was considered noble and heroic. The United States military operated on entirely different logic. Men like General J. Lawton Collins understood there was no honor in sending young soldiers to die charging a steel door. The Americans did not fight for theatrical pride. They fought to win battles, destroy enemy resistance, and bring their boys home alive to their families. If victory required driving a 30-ton tank directly to the entrance of a bunker and firing until the enemy surrendered, then that was exactly what they would do without hesitation. When von Schlieben complained that America fought a rich man's war using machines instead of men, he believed he was insulting them. In reality, he was explaining exactly why the United States military had become unstoppable. The Americans valued the lives of their farm boys, mechanics, and factory workers far more than outdated ideas of European military chivalry. They shattered the illusion of Nazi superiority not only with overwhelming firepower, but with cold practical efficiency that arrogant German commanders simply could not understand. What do you think about this remarkable historical moment? Was the American decision to use point-blank tank fire the smartest way to save American lives during the battle? Share your thoughts and your family's history in the comments below. We read every single one. If you enjoy deeply researched historical stories about the men who fought in World War II, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of real historical warfare and battlefield justice. Thank you for watching. Respect the fallen, honor the veterans, and never forget history.